Hello listeners across the globe, and welcome to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. As you may have guessed, it's just me in the host seat tonight, but luckily I do have some correspondents with me to back me up. So, evening Brian.
Evening Skyblaze.
For a second there I wondered if you died.
No, I hadn't died. I got distracted, and I'm very easily distracted by things. You should know this by now.
Yeah, I keep wondering if I should just throw you a sparkly ball of string or something that keep you distracted for hours.
Where's the sparkly ball? Where's the sparkly ball? You said there was a sparkly ball. Was I lied to?
It's over
Hi,
there.
Brendan. And how are you this evening?
I'm doing remarkably well, actually. I think I mentioned on the Facebook page in passing that I've been having computer troubles. So I changed computers. I don't have troubles anymore.
Hooray!
So yeah, doing pretty well in that respect, I suppose.
Oh, good. Okay, John. Poke.
Yo.
Hello.
Hi! I'm doing pretty good, Skyblaze. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, all things considered. It's bloody hot and humid where I am, though.
I can
Sympathize?
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for.
Relate.
Sympathize, I was trying to say. Yeah. It is currently, according to my phone app, 88 degrees outside.
How much is that really? Hang
What's
on.
that?
Let me just check how much that is in real money.
Oh. You and your metrics.
Look, it makes much more sense.
No,
it's
I
about
agree.
About 31 Celsius, right? Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it has been hotter. It was up in the 90s earlier in the week, and this is Louisiana, so the humidity is always set at a standard too much. So
Yeah. Well, it's about 26 degrees in Sheffield at the moment, and we sit right on top of 5 rivers, including one that I live right next to. So you can imagine what the humidity is like here. And we Brits are not used to such things, so some of my friends are melting.
Yeah, isn't it usually just humid and wet, not humid and scorching?
Yep.
So yeah.
good times.
I know, right?
So,
boss lady, what are we up to tonight?
well, continuing with the usual form, I suppose we ought to do Ask a Geek. So, what have we got on here? Okay, Miguel Garza says, seems to be for all of us, is there any staples of your fandom that you now see has overstayed its welcome? Brian, why don't we start with you?
There's probably a lot that I can list. And I'll just, you know what, I'll just go for the low-hanging fruit. Death. Death in comics. Death for sake of death. More death over there. Some death over there. There's a lot of death. I feel like characters can live for a little bit longer than what they are been doing for a period of time now. You know, it's not bad. You don't have to kill someone. It's cool. We'll understand. Like, that's a trope that's been around since, you know, Gwen Stacy died, and it just hasn't gone away. Every quarter, someone has to die for our sales, and we're so desensitized to it now. We're just meh, whatever. So I wouldn't mind that kind of taking a huge break for a while.
Okay. Brendan, how about you?
I actually had to stop and think about this for a second, because, I mean, you know, I do board games in general, but my preferred topic is card games, and there's not a whole lot to complain about there, but then I remembered that one of the things that really, really annoys me about card games is the seemingly arbitrarily large number of rarity levels that we have in some of these sets. Like, you start with your basic common, uncommon, and rare, and then you add maybe one above that. But when you start getting into, like, the ghost rare, parallel rare, super ultimate mega rare or whatever you have. I mean, when you have 10 or more levels of rarity in a single card game, that's a problem. I'd greatly enjoy just seeing us ratchet that back down a little to a more manageable number. One of the prime offenders, by the way, let me just add before we go, is the rarity levels that you can only find when they're premium foil. And especially if they're cards you can only find premium foil. Like, those cards don't exist anywhere else.
The ones for that really make me cross are ones that you can only find in some obscure Japanese comic book and have never been released anywhere else.
Oh, and don't even get me started on the event promos. Oh my god!
Especially the ones that are required to complete a set. You know, you can't complete this set unless you have this obscure card from an event in Japan 6 years ago. And if you don't have that card, the set doesn't work properly, so fuck you. Oh, thanks very much, assholes.
Right. And as you said, making them functionally necessary is just the end-all, be-all. That, at that point, you're just about ready to say fuck it and turn your back on the whole thing.
Yep. Okay. So, that leaves us with one person hiding in the corner. That would be you, dude.
Oh, that's right. I'm a person. I forget sometimes. Things that have outstayed their welcome in movies. Well, the lowest hanging fruit is sequels and reboots. But, you know, that is the lowest hanging fruit, but sometimes I think people take pot shots at it too much simply because remakes are nothing new. I mean, they just really aren't. Some other things that I feel like have outstayed their welcome. There are certain franchises that I think just need to be laid to rest. Even among my preferred genre of horror. Like, there's a new Friday the 13th movie in the works. It's 3D again. I feel like...
Of course it is.
What was it? Yeah, of course it is, yeah. Well, it's not even the first time Friday the 13th has been 3D, but I don't know. I kind of feel like Jason, in general, could kind of be put to rest for a little while. I mean, the previous Friday the 13th movie, which they were kind of playing it fast and loose with, is it a reboot? Is it just a new sequel? I'm not even sure. They did this big reveal thing on, like, the MTV Movie News, where they're like, we're going to reveal to you for the first time, this is an MTV exclusive, Jason's new mask. And, like, they have it in a box, and they're slowly opening it, and it's dramatic music, and it's like, dung! And it's the same hockey mask it's always been.
Woohoo.
It's exactly the same mask he's been wearing ever since the third movie. I think it was the third movie where he got the mask.
Yes, you would be correct. As the Jason Voorhees aficionado here, he got the mask in the third movie. Because in the second movie, he had a bag over his head.
He did. He did.
And he
in
wasn't
the first
even
movie,
in the first one.
Nope.
Well, he kind of was towards, you know, the end. But, you know, with his little boat poppy-uppy bit. But yeah, and forgive me if I'm offending you by saying that Jason maybe needs to retire for a while, Brian. I just...
don't worry. You'll find out my feelings one night late in your sleep.
While you're wearing a hockey mask.
While I'm wearing a hockey mask. Hey, John, have you seen my new hockey mask and chainsaw?
I thought Jason had the machete.
Well, yeah, but you know...
That was actually an old callback to a Simpsons joke where Bart was being hounded by Sideshow Bob. And Homer freaked him out with a hockey mask and a chainsaw.
Good. Okay.
Do you have anything, Skyblaze?
I kind of do, and I'm going to gleefully nick Gonzo's place on this one because it's a video games thing. I am really, really fucking sick of certain nameless games companies who endlessly put out exactly the same game every year, changing a couple of minor details on it and just slapping it on the shelves.
you just described pretty much every big game developer ever.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's Call of Duty and the fucking endless fucking FIFA franchise, and I'm pretty sure that there's some American exclusive ones as well that I don't care about.
Well, yeah, the sports games are really the worst offenders here.
Oh, yeah.
Because every year's game is essentially just a roster update.
Yeah.
Except in the most extreme of circumstances.
They are using the same engine that they have been using for the past 4 years, with some very minor graphical updates and some name changes, and that's it. And it is so grossly cynical and shit, and it really disgusts me when they could just release a patch, you know, instead of charging like 35 quid to 40 quid for this, however much it is, like $60 in the US for a game that's just an expansion set. Let's be honest, and it really grinds my gears that they get away with it and nobody seems to object very much, and people just buy this year after year after year. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's kind of the principle of the reboot sequel in a way. It's the media producers are kind of convinced that people are afraid to try something that's new and different, and to a certain extent, the audience is kind of proving them right.
Which is really, really aggravating, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Except this isn't quite the same as the reboot principle that I think John is talking about. This is literally taking, as you said, Skyblaze, taking the game, slapping a new number on it, and spray painting some of the players different colors. Which is just even worse than a reboot, which in the movie industry can be, you know, a really loving affair. Witness the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. Which, I mean, it had its flaws, it had its ups and downs. I liked it for what it was, but then again, I was not of a proper age to be viewing the originals, so there's that.
And before you say anything, neither was I.
Okay, so maybe it's just that I haven't had the impetus to actually go and find them. I've had other things occupying my mind.
To be fair,
Speaking of which,
the original series movies were out when I was a kid, so kinda sorta.
Right.
I feel like we've exhausted this question.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah, let's move on. Okay.
Moving on.
Right, Ricky to Brendan, what got you into card games?
Yeah, I thought there was a question in there for me somewhere. Actually, this is kind of a funny story because it ties into multiple fandoms that I've, you know, been involved in as over the course of my career as a geek. So my first gaming system period was a Game Boy Pocket, and I got it when I was 8. A few years later, Pokemon comes along.
And you were doomed.
Oh Lord! I was skeptical at first, but you know, I looked over my younger brother's shoulder. He got a Game Boy at about the same time I did, and it looked interesting. Occasionally, I'd steal the game, you know, play a little on my own. Then I knew I just had to go get myself a copy of my own. And then the trading cards hit. It was my best friend who lived up the street at that time who introduced me to those. Oh my God, that was even worse than the game. I mean, I was sneaking out of the house to go buy packs for myself. That's how bad it was. Sneaking out of the house to go buy packs with myself, that with money that wasn't mine. I borrowed it from my parents. But, I mean, it was a bit of an obsession, and that's what opened the door. What blew it all the way off the hinges was Yu-Gi-Oh! A few years later.
Hooray!
Because after I'd figured out that there was an actual game you could play with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows up, and it's got the card game and an anime series integrated right on the face of it. That was what did it. I played Yu-Gi-Oh! All the way up through college. A fair distance into college, too. And then I shifted gears into Magic, and that's where I've stayed ever since. So, yeah, that's pretty much the story.
Okay, so on to the next question. Tom wants to know from Brian, what do you think of the new Batgirl design?
Okay. I'm also going to preference this that I'm not an artist or designer. So I honestly don't know what is technically good or bad in terms of what artwork and designs for costumes are. Usually I'm just like, oh, okay, it looks good, and I kind of go on. The new Batgirl, though, from what I can tell, looks good. I mean, it's a way more simpler design than what she was currently wearing. And I think that suit, the reason she gets a new costume, I think the suit gets destroyed, so she has to sort of make a costume from scratch. So she's got, like, you know, a jacket to it. She still has her cape, very easy, like, gloves, and she's wearing Doc Martens, I believe, yellow Doc Martens for her boots.
Mm-hmm.
So
Good
it
choice.
it looks great. I know when it got announced, it got shown off, everybody got, like, uber excited for it. So if everyone seems to enjoy this new sort of simpler look, then good on to them. Again, it's just, to me, it's going, oh, that's a nice, simple look. Ding!
Yeah, I didn't even know about it until the question was asked, and I just got through Googling it, and it looks solid to me. Looks like something a human being would wear.
Yeah, it looks practical, which is so rare for a especially somebody as a female superhero's costume. I rejoice.
Yeah.
'Cause it looks like it's something that you can actually run and fight in. So, kudos.
I'm really, really inordinately fond of the way the cape attaches to the shoulders. Like,
Yeah,
that looks
the snap,
really
they're
cool to
like
me.
snap cape things.
Yeah, it just looks good.
I have actually more of this story in my headlines a little bit later in the show.
Oh, do you? Well then.
Okay. Right, so, Jerry wants to know, John, what are some of the movie tropes you'd like to see go away?
Ho ho ho. Well, let's see. Movie tropes I would like to see go away. There are certain now I like action movies. I like adventure-y, shooty, stabby, blowy uppy things as much as anyone. But there are a few cliches and tropes from action movies that I feel are overused. Gigantic fiery explosions have their place in action movies, but not everything needs to explode in a giant fireball. And not every car needs to flip over the slightest accident. Like, they don't need to flip over and explode when a grocery cart hits them in a parking lot. This is a very personal, very probably petty one, but I've always been annoyed by that whole soldiers or cops running into a building and someone just screaming, "Go, go, go!" I mean, maybe they do that in reality, I don't know, but I kind of get tired of hearing people go, "Go, go, go!" in movies, and especially when they use that in the trailer. Other cliche bits of dialogue, like, "We work as a team," or "I work alone," can just go somewhere else. Overabundance of CG everything. Although, I'm of two minds about that, because on the one hand, I do appreciate the art and the time and the talent that goes into CG animation, and I feel that computer animators are among the least appreciated and worst compensated people in all of Hollywood. And, the whole thing, people going, well, people are reacting to... actors are reacting to things that aren't even there. It's unreal. It's not real cinema. This has been a part of movie making since at least King Kong, people. Get over that. That's not the reason to complain about it. Although some people like George Lucas do push it way too far.
What, special effects? Or
the
computer
whole
animation in general?
Well, the whole thing with actors in imaginary environments reacting to imaginary things that aren't there. Some people say
that goes all the way back to Charlie Chaplin.
I
mean,
know. Some people.
Sorry.
Some people just like to complain about things that aren't things that. Anyway, But probably my number one trope that I would really, really, really love to see go away from movies is the idea of the accessory and or token female character. The character who exists solely either to be the love interest or to be the damsel in distress, or whatever the case it is, or the eye candy, the female character who only exists for the purpose of male characters' needs or the male audience's gaze. That needs to go away, because we are living in the 21st century here, people, and we do need to stop treating 50% of the population like they are an object. Come on.
This, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I think we've covered that one fairly thoroughly. Thank you, John. And the final question for tonight. Christopher Johnson wants to know from all of us, what has been the biggest disappointment that you've ever experienced with something you were looking forward to? And we are all banned from saying Last Airbender before you all start.
Damn it!
Okay. Well, since we appear to have eaten Brian's choice, why don't we go with Brendan?
Ooh, okay. So major disappointments. So something we were looking forward to, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we... Ooh, okay. I think I've actually got one, but it's going to be outside of my usual sphere, okay?
Go ahead.
All right. So, a few years back, there was this game development studio that some of our listeners may have heard of, maybe not. They were called Bizarre Creations. They were kind of small, but they did really, really, really good work in terms of making racing video games. There was this project they were working on called Blur. It was going to be sort of like a kart racer, but with actual licensed vehicles. Like, you'd be driving around the track in a BMW or a Ford or a Dodge or a whatever, and throwing cruise missiles at each other. Or stylized cruise missiles. I played the open beta. It looked fantastic. I spent probably more time playing it than I should have. And the second the open beta closed, I went out and I pre-ordered that game. What was really, really sad to me was I got the game, and yeah, the campaign wasn't exactly as nice as I would have expected, but you know, the multiplayer was practically dead. There were all the people that had played the closed beta, very, very few of them actually went out and bought the actual game. So I didn't have nearly as much fun with it as I had hoped. It was a great game, and it really stinks what happened to Bizarre. They got bought by Activision right before they released Blur.
Oh, no.
And because Blur did badly, they got shuttered.
Of course they did.
Yeah. I mean, it's not all bad. It sucks that that happened to them, but they did eventually bounce back, form a new game studio that's making more racing games, which I am mostly buying without exception. So, there's that. I mean, they've still got my money.
I've actually got a similar story, because several years back, it's like, what was it, 2006, 2005? I can't quite remember. The guys who used to be Blizzard North, who created Diablo 2, and the original Diablo game, had split off to form their own studio. I think Flagship, I think? Yeah, I think it was Flagship. And they were going to create this game that was referred to as Hellgate London. The idea is it's post-apocalyptic London, and the gates of hell have literally opened under London. Demons and horrible creatures roam the streets of London, and you have to have bases that are in London Underground stations, from which you would forge out to go and kill demons and level up and get loot. It was a kind of more up-to-date version of Diablo, but set in London, which I thought was the best fucking idea. And some of the early screenshots and early like playability demos and so on looked fucking amazing. And I was so looking forward to this. Then the studio got into some financial trouble, and they got bought up by EA. And EA basically said, what have you got? And they went, this, which is about half the game, which was still in very early beta at the time, and said, great, release it. And they went, what? And it got released, and it was buggy as fuck. Half the features that were supposed to be in it weren't there because the game wasn't finished. The studio crashed and burned after that, and EA went, well, sucks to be you. And it seized all its intellectual property, so there's never going to be even a sequel to the bloody thing. Which pisses me off, because it had so much potential. It was such a great idea. It could have been so awesome. But then those guys, those developers, went, well, fuck you, EA, and fucked off to go and form Runic Games, which made Torchlight and Torchlight 2. So it's not all bad, but it just pisses me off because it looked so amazing in its early days, and it could have been so awesome because it's such a great idea.
Fair enough. Alright. Well, yeah. I mean, mine was... the players didn't... Well, sorry. What happened with yours was, you know, it was executive meddling. Mine was a little different, but I can see the parallels.
There were parallels going on there, and they're both video games, so I figured it was relevant.
Yeah.
So, John.
Well, when I first saw this question, I mentioned that there was a shooting fish in a barrel response that I could give for this one. And I am completely content to continue pumping up my shotgun and aiming it square at the nearest halibut that floats by. There's this little franchise some of you may have heard of called Star Wars.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, when the new trilogy was announced, you know, Star Wars fanboys, and even casual fans, whatever, people freaked out. People were anticipating this thing so much. I remember reading in a local paper someone who saw the first trailer for Episode 1, saying that he was crying because he said it was like someone who had only read the New Testament being shown the Old Testament for the first time. People get really emotionally invested in Star Wars.
Let's be honest, fans and geeks tend to get emotionally invested in an awful lot of things.
This is true. This is true.
I'm not that I'm judging. I mean, I'm a huge Knight Rider fan. I get really fucking invested in that.
No, it's true. It's true. And the thing is, when you talk about something that people are looking forward to, or me specifically, I don't know, that's something that you're looking forward to that winds up being a huge disappointment, there is probably never going to be a movie with as much buzz, with as much anticipation around it as Star Wars Episode 1, that there will probably never be another movie with that much anticipation that turns out to be that much of a disappointment. That kind of is like the standard for me of setting the bar really, really, really high, and then just like slip and sliding under it. You know, they just took around and just went straight down under it.
It was so surreal because I remember going to see Phantom Menace, and like you go into the cinema and everyone's like, oh yeah, and really pumped up, and like, you know, I don't know if this is a general American thing, but a lot of footage I've seen of Americans watching cinema, they like, you know, the lights go down and they're like, woo! And Brits don't do that.
It depends on the movie, and it depends on the crowd.
Yeah, Brits as a general rule don't do that, and they don't do the thing where they applaud at the end either, unless the film has been spectacularly good. I've seen it all of a couple of times.
Yeah, now that I can speak to. Americans don't necessarily always applaud at the end of the film. Usually they don't, but sometimes they do if it's been a really good film. Sometimes, I've been in the theater for this, if something really, really, really cool happens on the screen, people will applaud for that too. My example would be Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn killing Lurtz in the first Lord of the Rings movie. I was in the theater for that. There was applause.
I heard applause. I encountered applause in all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, and I encountered a lot of it in the Avengers.
Yeah, there was cheering in the Avengers. There wasn't applause in the British theatres. But yeah, as a general rule, Brits tend to be a little bit more reserved about this. But we did get the American thing about, you know, lights go down and everyone's like, woo! And it's like, okay, that's unusual. And then it got to the end, and there's just this almost funereal pall. Yeah. Like, people kind of looking at each other going, that was it? Really?
The fuck did I just watch?
The weird thing about episode 1 is it's confusing. It's confusing as all hell. I remember for years I was in denial about it. Like, I was trying to cling on to the idea of that was a good movie. And I did the same thing for episode 2, and even for episode 3, but you know what actually finally got through to me, what finally broke me and made me realize that these weren't good movies? Like, the moment that finally popped my little bubble of conscious delusion. And it was a conscious effort, I tell you. I remember actually internally arguing myself into believing these were good movies, because I just wanted to believe it so badly. But the moment that broke it for me was the no. It was the Darth Vader staggering off of the slab Frankenstein style and doing his big do not want.
Yeah.
That was the moment where I was like, okay, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it.
It was just one of those kind of... Because the thing that really gets me is that... Because I really liked the portrayal of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn. I thought they were great. It was the best thing about that, and the Duel of the Fates was the best thing about the movie for me. And I read some fanfics that actually, with a couple of like fairly small additions and, you know, bits of dialogue and minor plot points, managed to make the plot make sense. Because somebody actually explained it as, you know, Palpatine, because the people figuring out, like, who could actually be responsible for this? It's like, because on the surface of it, it doesn't seem to make much sense. It's like, well, if somebody was trying to set it up so that they ended up being essentially a government in exile, then, you know, either they would end up in power as a government in exile, or... you know, they'd be beaten back and they'd say, oh yes, and, you know, heap great praise upon us to get themselves political power. And it was like, they explained it such that, you know, okay, so somebody has clearly set this up so that they're going to win no matter what happens. And it was like just a few minor bits, and it was like all of a sudden, it was like, fuck me, the plot suddenly makes sense, just with these minor alterations.
It's all you I mean, people have talked about doing massive overhauls and how they would do things differently. I mean, there's so many different ideas out there for an alternate take on this, and all of them are more interesting than what we've got. But you're really pretty much on the ball there with just a few little things changed. Even what we have could have worked better than it did. Yeah. Just a little bit of clarification on what was actually going on. Deleting some things about midichlorians. And
well, so somebody actually did do that, where it's like, you know, you don't even have to delete that. You know, it's not midichlorians that cause the Force, it's just that you tend to get a high concentration of these things in people that have high Force sensitivity.
See, that works too.
And I was like, you know what? You can actually insert that theory into the films with no alteration, and it's fine.
So correlation, not necessarily causation.
Exactly.
Yeah. There you go.
You're welcome, Star Wars fans!
And the Star Wars fans are too busy sobbing, as they have been ever since 1999.
Right, who have we got left? Mr. Bryan!
Well, I'll try to make mine a little bit quick, because my two big disappointments actually came out real recently. Several years ago, IDW was putting together their very big first event, crossover event, called Infestation.
Oh,
where,
that thing.
Yeah, where they had like
Yeah.
the OG Star Trek, Transformers, Ghostbusters, G.I. Joe. And I said, this is going to be great. It could be completely crazy, but I don't care, because I've never seen these many like different franchises cross over. Except I didn't read the fine print, where none of these franchises actually met each other.
Yeah.
They only fought the same enemy, which was this sort of weird zombie creation that was created from one of the IDW guys, which is like it was his series that he sort of, I guess, wanted to promote. And so when you get to like the actual series and you start reading them, you're like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. These characters aren't meeting, and the Transformer issue is completely like sidetracked the current storyline that was going on in the actual like Transformer comics that never really officially recovered from it, which is probably why they split the books later down the line. And so I was like, this sucks, like in the most general of terms. I'm like, this is not what I expected at all. I hope they don't do this. Oh, they're doing it again. And a sequel came out, which was a little bit better.
I was going to say,
but
the sequel was better.
Yeah.
Which isn't saying a great deal.
It's very much going like, well, that was crap. I can do a little bit better than crap. Like Mud. I can do Mud. The second one actually was, it was almost the exact same thing when Dynamite got Voltron. They're like, we're going to make a Voltron comic. I'm like, Voltron? Yay! I haven't seen you in years, my friend. What have you been up to? And then the book comes out, and it's a complete overhaul of the series. Now that the characters are like originally sort of matched what they were, it was this weird darker tone, and like they added some really strange things, like Voltron was helped build by an alien race who then died and became a ghost, and then he was in Voltron, and Voltron started talking. And like by issue 6, I'm like, I don't like this anymore. It's not because it's different, it's because it's bad. So I was really disappointed with the Voltron.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like they got Voltron confused with Neon Genesis Evangelion, to be honest.
It does a little, like literally it does.
Yeah.
Like after the first arc, I slowly put it down, slid it away, going, I'm sad now. I hope somewhere down the line, something will happen better. But at least I got some Alex Ross art out of it that I would love to buy as a poster. Because when Alex Ross did the covers, it was the covers of the cartoon series, not the actual what was inside the comic, because it was completely different.
Because he's a massive nerd, isn't he?
Yeah. So I was like, all right, well, I got some cool things out of it. Wish it was better. So those were my two big disappointments. I was really excited for, and then afterwards was like nuts.
Oh. Well, okay. I think that's it for our Ask a Geek questions for this week. So I guess we should probably go over to the headlines. So, which one of you buggers wants to go first?
Oh, me. Pick me, teacher.
Okay, go on then, Brian.
Alright. We're still in the midst of the San Diego Comic-Con pre-release schedule going on right now, so there's a lot of news. Unfortunately, some of it might be a little bit on the scarce side. IDW October is getting a little more busy as our friends the Ghostbusters are not done yet at the publisher. Sadly, this isn't a new ongoing, but a short miniseries where they meet the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It is the standard one team gets transported from their world to the others. This time, the Turtles are sent from their New York to the New York of the Ghostbusters. The series is being co-written by Eric Bunham and Tom Waltz of both of these individual series. Along with that, IDW is also going to introduce Edward Scissorhands to the comic book scene for the very first time. This series is based on the Tim Burton film and will be handled by cartoonist Kate Leith as well as art by Drew Rorschach. To be honest, I don't know how much mileage one can get out of an Edward Scissorhands 24 years later. But I have seen Stranger Things. Look for both of these titles to debut in October. In celebration of the 10th anniversary of Dynamite publishing the Evil Dead / Army of Darkness comics, they're putting together the art of the Army of Darkness. The collection will feature works by J. Scott Campbell, Arthur Sundam, Nick Bradshaw, John Bolton, Ben Timblesmith, Tim Seeley, and George Perez. That's just to name a few. The cover itself will feature artwork from the original movie poster painted by Michael Hussain. The book is slated for October release, just in time for Halloween. Boom is continuing to tease their upcoming San Diego Comic-Con projects with a new one featuring J.G. Jones. But like before, we're not given the full story right away, what the project might be, or who he's even working with at the time. Please stay tuned, as more information will hopefully become available. DC is not done yet with new teams on books, as the latest title of the shift is Batgirl with Gabe Simone leaving the book, and the new team of Cameron Stewart, Brendan Fletcher, and Babs Tarr are taking over and giving Batgirl a new suit and almost a fun attitude to go along with it. The new team takes over the book on issue 35. Now, as for the reason Gail is gone, it's not like last time where a random email came up and then she was fired, but then randomly put back on the book. It seems there was creative differences with her and the editor at the time, and they professionally parted ways. Though soon after that, the editor then left DC, and when the new editor came on, it was his idea to bring on this new direction. Gail's timing might not be perfect at this point, but I hardly think she doesn't like this new take on the character. Marvel took to the talk show The View to show off a brand new series for the publisher, but it has a familiar name, Thor. But this time, he's a she? That's the idea presented. Thor will be losing his hammer soon, doing something to make him unworthy, and thus the hammer goes to a new person. But we don't know yet who this woman is. Someone is saying she's possibly Thor's granddaughter, but no real hints were given. Knowing Norse mythology, it just could be Thor himself, as a girl. But that may not also happen either, as the other Thor book will probably continue along as well, with Thor running around with his axe instead of his hammer. Writer Jason Aaron is quoted as saying that the woman isn't going to be Thor Girl or Lady Thor or any names as such, but just Thor, leading to the idea that the name is also kind of a title, meaning that you have to be called Thor when you are the god of thunder. Now, this is all assumptions anyway. More information and clues will be given, I guarantee you, at the time San Diego Comic-Con comes around, so keep out for Thor and Thor this fall. Well, that's all the time I have on these multiverse headlines. I now turn it over to my tabletop gaming correspondent, Brendan. Brendan.
Thanks, Brian, and to everyone else, welcome. As you've probably figured out by now, this is Brendan the Blast Seeker, and I'm here with your regularly scheduled summary of the state of play in the tabletop world. We've got a lot of information to cover, and only a few turns to do it in, so without, I'm afraid, any ado whatsoever, here is the current board position for all of your favorite gaming needs that don't come with a power cord. This episode, we're going to wrap up reporting on the 2015 core set for Magic the Gathering, for two reasons. One, M15 is set for its official release in hobby shops and friendly local game stores this Friday, July the 18th, and it'll be in larger retailers by the following week. And two, there's only so much left that we haven't covered yet. On that note, though, let's get to covering those things. Ever since M11 brought back the scry mechanic for a year, Magic's annual core sets have each featured prominently a different returning mechanic. Magic 2012 had Bloodthirst, and Magic 2013 offered a different take on Exalted. M14, though, did something a little differently. Rather than bring back a keyword, it brought back an entire race of creatures, the infamous Slivers. Beloved by many a player and abhorred by even more, the Slivers of M14 made big changes to the historical formula with new mechanical and artistic directions, by which of course I mean in terms of their cards. Slivers may be pretty smart, but they're nowhere near Da Vinci or Michelangelo just yet. Anyway, Slivers return in M15 for one last go before they rotate out until their next unexpected reemergence. There are a total of 7 new cards that deal with Slivers. 6 of them are creatures, with 1 uncommon sliver in each color, and a mythic rare 5-color sliver. The 7th card is a rare, non-basic land card called the Sliver Hive. It's somewhat narrow, of course, as 2 of its 3 abilities only work in dedicated sliver decks. But when compared to past tribal support lands, it blows them out of the water in terms of power level. Not only does it come into play untapped by default, it taps for any color of mana to cast slivers, and can crank out an extra 1/1 colorless sliver creature token a turn if you have the mana and another sliver there already. Not to be outdone, the aforementioned 5-color Sliver Hive Lord is a 5/5 legendary creature who makes all your other slivers indestructible. It was originally going to be even bigger than that, except at higher power and toughness levels, test players were using it in every deck they could jam it into, just because of its size and its indestructibility. Something tells me, though, that Sliver devotees will still have a lot of things to be happy about when M15 releases, even if the art direction isn't one of those things. We've talked a lot about the new cards in Magic 2015, but there are some important reprints in the set that may shape the coming Standard and Modern seasons as well, and, as such, deserve to be addressed. I mentioned a few moments ago that most modern core sets bring back a popular mechanic and play with it in new ways. M15's returning mechanic is Convoke, and while there are plenty of new cards with Convoke that have lots of potential, the marquee card here is definitely Chord of Calling. Originally printed in the first Ravnica block, Chord has proven itself to be a powerful utility card in Modern, and reprinting it for another Standard run should give rise to some inventive and adaptable decks. Also worthy of note is the return of Haunted Plate Mail, an equipment artifact that can become a creature for a turn if you don't already control any creatures. This is a valuable tool for control players due to its low initial investment of 4 mana, not having a cost to animate it, aside from not controlling any creatures, and the fact that it's only a creature when you need it to be, which lets it dodge most conventional removal spells. One of the more surprising reprints was that of Hornet Queen, which was originally printed in the first Commander supplement. This reprinting makes her legal in Modern as well as Standard, and while she may not make much of a splash, I wouldn't be surprised if some rogue deck builder found a way to bust her wide open. After all, 5 creatures for 1 card and 7 mana is a pretty good deal, and the fact that they all have flying and death touch can really screw with combat math. What shocked me even more than that, though, was the reprinting of Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. We don't have Cabal coffers in Standard or Modern, praise Helix. But after seeing that particular 2-card combo in action, it's very hard to see Urborg on the other side of the table and react with anything other than pure dread. Even more so than Hornet Queen, I expect someone to break this, and soon. Realistically speaking, though, the 5 reprints that are guaranteed to have the biggest impact are the 5 dual land reprints in M15. This time, we get the Pain lands, and just the enemy-colored ones at that. For the uninitiated, those would be Battlefield Forge, Caves of Koilos, Lanawar Wastes, Shivan Reef, and Yavimaya Coast. Those lands come into play untapped by default, making them ideal for aggressive decks, but they also demand a point of your life for each colored mana that you want to produce. Whether you love them or hate them, you'll have to get used to seeing them at tournaments until the next expansion gives us an alternative, though. That should about do it for Magic 2015. As I mentioned earlier, the official release is Friday, July the 18th, and you can expect to see it start to trickle into stores in the weeks following. This set, together with Theros Block, comprises the basis of the coming Standard season, so even if you don't feel the need to pick up any product, Magic players who frequent Standard events should at least familiarize themselves with its contents, so as to be prepared for what they may face. Above all, though, don't forget to have fun. We now bring you some important news from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Front regarding changes to the Forbidden and Limited lists. These changes, effective as of July the 3rd, include no additions to the Forbidden list at all, but that's not nearly the most surprising thing going on here. Starting with the Limited list, we have Synchro Monster Goyo Guardian dropping to Limited from Forbidden, and Trap card Gear Gia Gear entering the lists at Limited position. Both of these are powerful cards that enable players to summon extra monsters, and in the case of Goyo Guardian, those monsters aren't even your own to begin with. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the future, but in the meantime, all duelists need to remember that they are limited to 1 copy of each of those 2 cards between their main, extra, and side decks combined. The semi-limited list has some drama of its own going on, with Effect Monster Magician of Faith, Synchro Monster Formula Synchron, and Spell card Reinforcement of the Army all dropping from limited to semi-limited. I'm even less sure of how I feel about this. Formula Synchron requires that more hoops be jumped through than the other two, but it still replaces itself upon summoning, and it still lets you special summon a very powerful monster at a time when you typically aren't able to do so, that being in the middle of your opponent's turn. Reinforcements of the Army, on the other hand, lets you search your deck for a warrior-type monster card of level 4 or less. Contrary to all appearances, this is a laughable restriction, as there are so many low-level warrior-type monsters with so many varied effects that you'll invariably just be able to search up whatever you want, provided you construct your deck right. Even Reinforcements pales in comparison to Magician of Faith, though. She gets back your best spell card from the graveyard with nothing more than a simple flip activation. And while many of the most backbreaking spells are still on the Forbidden and Limited lists, that still leaves plenty of valid targets and plenty of problems for opponents. I voiced surprise the last time we talked about Magician's place in the lists, and that surprise has been solidly upgraded to concern. Magician of Faith, along with Formula Synchron and Reinforcement of the Army, is now allowed in numbers of up to 2 copies each between a duelist's main, extra, and side deck combined. We've saved the best for last, though, as there are 2 cards coming off the lists completely: Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force. Let's leave Dimensional Prison aside for a moment and focus on the freaking mastodon in the room. Mirror Force? Out of all the cards to come clean off the lists, I would never in a million years have predicted Mirror Force would be among them. Feel free to call me out if I'm wrong, as I have no doubt some of you will anyway, but I'm pretty sure that from the first time it was first printed as part of Metal Raiders, the second Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster series ever, it was a near constant on both the limited list and, once it became clear that one was necessary, the forbidden list. It was a great surprise and source of glee to friends of mine when they learned they would be able to play 2 Mirror Forces after a change to the lists a year or so back. Now, though, I just have to wonder what in the 9 realms could have happened to cause a metagame where one of the greatest swing-producing trap cards of all time is now permissible in full sets of 3 per deck. As for Dimensional Prison, it's a more powerful Sakuretsu armor, which banishes an attacking monster rather than just destroying it. It probably deserves to be semi-limited to my sensibilities, but honestly, when compared with Mirror Force, which destroys the attacker, and everything else on your opponent's side of the field that happens to be in attack position, I don't really see how another single target trap is going to cause too much of an issue. As a reminder, both Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force are playable in numbers of up to 3 copies each between your main, extra, and side deck combined. Any more than that, and you stop dealing with the Forbidden and Limited lists and start dealing with basic rules of the game. Keep it together out there, people.
Welcome back to Conversations. As I have been doing for the past few episodes, and it's been getting pretty popular, I'm going to be continuing with my convention survival tips. So, on with the show. Number 12. Regarding cosplaying. If you're going to cosplay, there are a few things to keep in mind. Most cons are in summer, and a convention floor is often a very large mass of people. And as we all know, people in large groups generate lots of heat. So it's important to bear this in mind when you're planning your costume, since wearing things like fur, latex, fake leather, or lots of layers can get very uncomfortable after a while. People wearing fursuits or mascot suits have been known to pass out from heat exhaustion at cons, so if you do get overheated, take a break and get some water. Cons also tend to be crowded, so if you have any bulky or trailing bits on your costume, make sure you have a method for dealing with that so people don't bash into or trip over you. Number 13. Regarding props. Still staying with cosplaying, lots of costumes include large props like swords or guns. First thing to do is check the convention's weapons policy. Some conventions and hotels are very sensitive to people with replica weaponry. Some cons ask that all weapons be checked and peace bonded before you're able to carry them on the con floor, and some cons ban replica weapons like guns entirely, especially if they look realistic. Almost all conventions have very strict rules about steel weapons, some only allowing them to be carried by people with recognised martial arts weapon licenses, like me, or banning them entirely, and I have known that to happen. If the con doesn't have a clear policy on their website regarding this, best to email the organisers. If you still don't get an answer, in all honesty, it's probably best to err on the side of caution with this one. Number 14. Volunteering. If you don't know many people on the con circuit, or if you're a bit shy, or maybe your normal group just hasn't turned up this year, Or maybe you just want to get a bit more involved. Then volunteer! A convention lives or dies on its volunteers, and most cons can never get enough of people offering to help. Volunteering is a great way to meet people and make friends, even the guests if you get lucky. Some cons provide volunteers with free swag or access to preferential seating at talks and workshops. Be careful though, as con running can become addictive if you aren't very careful. Well, that's all from our headlines for this week, and since it's a smaller group this week, we're going to go straight into the musical break, and when we return we'll be analysing the Dashcon disaster and talking about what went wrong. See you soon.
Now I'm thinking maybe I was stoned. I felt my feet lift off the ground, and my heart was screaming at my bones. I need you closer. As he's in the middle of the street, then I pretend he's mine to keep. Cars are running fast on both sides of his head. His eyes say closer, closer, closer. I met him when the sun was down. The bar was closed. We both have had no sleep. My face beneath the street lamp, it reveals what it is lonely people seek. Closer, closer. Closer, closer. When you're close enough to lose, close to the point where you know that your mind, it cannot choose. Close enough to lose, close enough to lose your heart. Now I'm thinking maybe I was stoned. I felt my feet lift off the ground, and my heart was screaming at my bones. I need you closer, closer, closer. You met me when the sun was down, and the bar was closed. We both have had no sleep. My face beneath the street lamp, it reveals what it is lonely people seek. Closer, closer. Closer, closer. Then you're close enough to lose, close to the point where you know that your mind, it cannot choose. Close enough to lose,
And we are back! So this evening we are going to be discussing Dashcon. If you haven't heard about this, then have you been under a rock for the past couple of days? I do have to wonder, because it's been all over the internet. But we'll be talking about Dashcon, or how not to run a convention. So, who wants to give the rundown on what this epic clusterfuck actually pertains to?
I feel like all we have to say right now is ball pit.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'm afraid I'm going to need something a little more in depth than that to go on. As
Okay, I'll give you a brief rundown. Dashcon was a convention that happened over this weekend, which is just gone, for Tumblr users, hence the name, because the main Tumblr interface is referred to as the dashboard. Pretty much from even before the con, it was becoming fairly obvious that something was badly wrong. Especially when on the Friday night of the convention, the convention organisers suddenly turned up in the main convention areas to ask for donations of $17,000 to make sure that the convention didn't get kicked out of the hotel. Allegedly. Now, which is funny because the hotel says that they didn't do this, according to people who have got in touch with the hotel. And nobody seems to know where this money has gone.
Yeah, it's, okay. I've actually been... Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Yeah, before I'm going to kind of run down all the issues, like very briefly run through all the issues first, and then we'll start dissecting it in detail. After this, the Welcome to the Night Vale podcast guys were supposed to be one of the main guests, turned up at the venue, and were then told that they weren't going to be paid for their appearance. They weren't going to be reimbursed for their hotel, they weren't going to be given travel expenses, they weren't going to be given any money at all. Considering that they are just a bunch of dudes who run a podcast, they said, well, we can't really afford to stay here then, bye! And left. The attendees who were at the panel for Welcome to the Night Vale were left waiting in the panel room for over an hour before they were told. The people who had actually reserved seats for this event and various other events were told that as compensation, and they'd paid extra money for this in some cases, that they could spend an extra hour in the ball pit. The ball pit basically being a child's paddling pool half filled with ball pit balls. Yeah. One of the events was a performance of, I think it was something called Dancing Giraffe or something like that. I'm not entirely sure.
Steam-powered giraffe.
That's the one, thank you. Which they had been pushing quite heavily, and people had like bought like advance tickets for. They cancelled a good couple of weeks prior to the event. But allegedly, con staff were still pushing the tickets for this right up until the event itself. Yeah, so... And from what anyone can tell, panels were quite often late, or didn't happen at all. The various fandom streams, the organisers of which were nowhere to be found most of the time. And according to quite a number of people who were attending it, and a couple of people who were actually involved in the pre-organisation of it, things had pretty much started to go off the rails from the very start. So...
Yeah, it's, See, the thing about this is, I've actually been, I've been following this with tremendous interest. And I've been reading a ton of different things about this entire debacle. And it is a debacle. This is comparable to what happened with Lost Pegasus, like a year ago, for anyone who remembers that mess. The giant pony convention, the giant brony convention in Nevada that managed to not only have checks bounce for the voice actors and all this other mess, but managed to serve Tara Strong, the voice of Twilight Sparkle, eggplant at the Meet the Voice Actor dinner, which is one of the things that she's allergic to. Eggplant, not Meet the Voice Actor dinners. I'm pretty sure she's not allergic to those. But, no, it's, the thing about Dashcon... Excuse me, I'm sorry. The thing about Dashcon is that there are so many different stories floating around about what happened to it at the convention, and so many different contradicting reports. And there are some people who have actually been spreading, like, outright lies and rumors to mix in with everything. Which
Welcome
is
to
very
the internet.
I know, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
There are some people who apparently didn't even know that a lot was wrong until they started checking Tumblr and reading the different stories that other people had heard. It was very, very strange. The "we need $17,000 now" thing did actually happen. People have taken to referring to that as the extortion rally. Basically, what happened, as far as anyone can tell. Well, first of all, this was the first convention that any of the organizers had ever been involved in. No one on the staff had prior convention experience, which,
And
funny enough, is the same case with Las
The
Vegas.
vast majority of them were college students.
Yeah. Also, for a lot of the people who were going to this was their first convention, and a lot of them were kind of on the young side to begin with. I think the upper age range was about, like, 20 or something like that for this con. From what I can tell, reading about some of the people who were on the staff, there were basically different committees appointed to the different fandoms they expected to show up. Like, okay, this is the Sherlock committee, this is the Doctor Who committee, this is the blah, 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 blah. Apparently, there were different committees, and the committees were primarily tasked with arranging events and panels and guests, depending on the fandom. They were divided up by the different fandoms they expected to show up. So, you know, this was the Sherlock committee, this was the Supernatural committee, this was the Doctor Who committee, etc., etc. And from what I can tell, basically it was just some of the committees had way more people and way more resources than others, and pretty much all of them were left to fend for themselves by the management.
Yeah, that's the impression I got as well. I'd also like to point out, as somebody who has been involved in convention running, I'm actually currently on the committee for the Redemption Convention in the UK. That is a spectacular way to end up with an awful lot of conflicting information and a lot of people not understanding what's going on. You need to have a central point that organises things and people report to them. Not having a bunch of different people who talk to each other and don't talk to you. Or don't talk to each other, which is even worse.
Don't talk to each other, or the management not talking to them.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that can go wrong.
And pretty much all of them did, from what we can understand.
Yeah, it's... The ball pit... Apparently, that wasn't even an official convention thing. Someone just brought that, and it was a joke. But it's become like the breakout meme of this entire thing, because if you see photos of this thing, there's this vast empty convention hall with like a couple of tables and this sad little snack stand at one end, and then there's this blue little kids waiting pool that's held together with duct tape. And it's half full of these little plastic balls, and occasionally you can see photos of a guy dressed as Slender Man sitting in it, and allegedly someone peed in it at some point over the weekend.
Delightful.
But speaking of that vast convention hall, that was another issue. They rented out like a super fancy convention center for this. Like, we're talking ritzy, expensive, like 5-star hotel and convention center for this thing. And the only restaurants in easy walking distance were all like this super ritzy hotel steakhouse and this other stuff. There was no cheap, convenient food anywhere nearby, which was another major oversight considering this con was mostly attended by teenagers. Let's see. Oh, they also told the hotel to expect somewhere around 1,000 to 2,000 people, and that's what they put on their promo. We're like, yeah, we're gonna have a huge turnout. They got 500. Which some people...
That's actually, from what I've heard, that's actually been exaggerated. The attendance figures were more like just over 1,000. So
Okay,
the 500 people thing has been an exaggeration. There were supposedly over 1,000 people there, which is still well under the amount that they were predicting, which was over 3,000.
I'm about to say they had to have gotten at least 1,000, especially when the whole $17,000 rally sort of came about, because to get that much out of 500 people, or however old these people were, that's a lot of money. But if 1,000 people all chipped in, like $17 or $20, I can see that getting to that range a lot easier. There was actually video of that whole incident.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, on YouTube. I remember watching through some of it and just being confused most of the time. And I'm sorry, I did have to laugh. I probably shouldn't have, but like a lot of the people in the audience got real serious, and they started doing the Mockingjay thing from Hunger Games. I'm sitting there going, "What are you doing?"
See, what they were told, and I've seen contradictory sources from this. Some people who seem pretty trustworthy, and not people who were managing the convention, because the convention's PR has been nightmarishly, hilariously incompetent in handling this. Their standard mode has just been to blame everybody else.
Yep.
They would be blaming Canada were that feasible.
Well, I do that every day, so it's my go-to.
But I pulled a very, very topical pop culture reference there. But the people who say that the hotel really did demand $17,000 say it was because they had an agreement, a contract worked out, but they got cold feet when they saw how few people were there, and some people say that the management hadn't realized what sort of convention it was, and when they saw cosplayers and nerds wandering around, they were like, ugh. So they said, yeah, change of plans, we want the money up front, and we want the money now, the remainder of the balance, and the convention couldn't afford it for multiple reasons, not only because they weren't taking in as much as they had anticipated, and this part of the story has been confirmed as true, but because they had already, before this con even opened, already put down a down payment on a new venue for next year's.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
I don't think that's going to happen.
And they're still advertising. They're still pre-regging. They're pre-regging for next year. Before they had even paid off anyone related to this year, they were already making the payment and the reservations for next year. And oh my lord. But so they gathered people together. They actually stopped all the panels and herded everyone into one room for the extortion rally, and we're like, the convention is going to shut down tonight unless we get $17,000. Get everything you have. They kept no records of who was donating what. They literally had like pillowcases and laundry bags that they were just shoving cash into. And apparently there are some people who are asking for refunds, and this is a thing that's happening. They're trying to refund some of the people, or allegedly trying. They're like, okay, well, we didn't keep any records of this, so just give us your name and tell us how much you gave.
Because that isn't open to abuse at all.
Well, obviously, I'm the guy that gave the $17,000, so you gotta give me the $17,000. Come on.
But the thing with Steam-Powered Giraffe that you were talking about with Skyblaze, that was actually even worse. Steam-Powered Giraffe didn't cancel weeks before the event, they canceled months before the event.
Okay, wow, that was worse than I thought.
And they were still headlining, Steam-Powered Giraffe and Welcome to Night Vale were like the two big headliner guests, because they were like the two famous groups that were coming to this thing that anybody actually had heard of. Really, I mean, they had a few other semi-celebrities, but those were the two big attractions.
They had the Baker Street Babes as well, who are pretty well known in Charlotte
that's right.
fandom.
I forgot about
because
that.
they were the only ones I was really familiar with, because I know a lot of big Sherlock fans. So
True that. The one out of all of them that I'm most familiar with is Welcome to Night Vale, and the story that you heard wasn't entirely accurate. What they did with them was basically Night Vale was told that they were going to be paid, and when it was getting close to time to their panel, maybe it was because of the extortion rally, maybe it was because of all the other stuff that they had seen that the con was doing incompetently, like the game room was one TV and one console, from what I understand.
that's actually been refuted as well. Apparently it was at one point, but then other people put in other TVs and other consoles.
Okay, see, that's the terrible thing about this convention.
It's like, no, one person should have been in charge of that.
Yeah. And it's just one. It's so hard to pull apart the rumor and the truth with this.
A couple of things that I did want to bring up, though. Again, having been involved on a con committee and having like friends who have been hotel liaisons and having dealt with hotels for conventions myself. Hotels do sometimes get snotty about having conventions in their hotel space, and quite often they will include in the contract, you know, areas where they are not allowed to advertise, areas where they, you know, if you have weapons, please do not go into this area because it's publicly accessible, blah 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 blah. All of this from any self-respecting, reputable hotel, and from what I understand, this was it was held in a big hotel chain, so they will certainly have like probably a pre-prepared document that they will edit for the purposes of these type of events. All of this stuff is laid out in detail. Nobody is going to come to you and say, like, yes, we need an extra 20 grand, please. That's ridiculous. That's actually like grounds for breach of contract. You can get your ass sued for that sort of behaviour. So I don't believe it for a second that can possibly be the case.
And there's another thing, like, is when because talking to Kat and Skyblaze, and even though I've only volunteered at conventions, so I only see the chaos behind the scenes. But I feel like even for like a first year, like, you probably shouldn't go to the super fancy, uber large hotels because
really should.
You don't really know what you're doing yet. You know, this is obviously a big experiment. And two, you want to keep things simple and small to A, save money, B, and help sort of build yourself. I know a lot of people who I know some vendors who've worked like first year conventions, and they're relatively in small places, and they sort of understand it's going to start that way, and hopefully you'll get a little bit bigger as years go on. So to start out at almost the top in your first year sounds like you're asking for trouble.
Well, the whole thing with this is that it sounds like they were just overreaching themselves. They got really, really overambitious. Because I feel like most of this, like a lot of people were saying, oh, this was just a giant scam to grab 17 grand and run off. I feel like, first of all, I feel like there are less complicated ways to do that. And secondly, I don't honestly feel like it was a scam, because from what I understand from some of the other behind-the-scenes people, the contract was kind of poorly negotiated on both sides, because this was the first, like, I think the hotel was new and this was actually their first convention, and apparently management did screw up according to some of their own policies. Not to take any of the blame off of Dashcon's management, but apparently this was just incompetence all around on every side. I feel like whether or not the 17 grand thing was legitimate, and I agree with Skyblaze that that's incredibly questionable. I feel like at some point this was intended to be a legitimate convention, but they just got really, really overambitious, and that completely wrecked them.
I suspect, from some other stuff I've heard in the kind of international fans that I know, who do a lot of cons like in Europe and in America and in the UK, that they may have bitten off more that they can chew because they heard about Nine Worlds. Nine Worlds first happened last year, and it was the first con I was aware of that had been funded by Kickstarter.
Okay.
And the Kickstarter did really well. The con did fantastically well. I mean, they actually started out fairly modestly with their Kickstarter goals and saying, right, okay, if we get this much, we'll go to this particular venue, and we'll have these couple of people, you know, a couple of comic guests and a book guest. That's what we're going to have. If we get this goal, then we'll have a bit more. If we get this ridiculous stretch goal, then we'll go to the Radisson Edwardian, which is a really big convention hotel and centre in Heathrow, London, and we'll have all of these guys. We'll get like Miltos from Game of Thrones, who played the fencing instructor. We'll have all of these people, and all this ridiculous stuff is like, yeah, we'll never reach that, and then they did. And they went, okay, let's go for it, what can we lose? And they did, and it was, by all accounts, I wasn't there because I couldn't afford it, but by all accounts it was amazing. I am going there this year. And I think that they may have heard about that success, because apparently Dashcon did have a Kickstarter first.
Yes, back when they were calling it TumbleCon, before
Yeah.
Tumblr made them change the name.
Yeah, and I think that success story may have made them a bit too big for their boots. And gone like, well, if they can do it, then so can we. The difference, of course, being that a lot of the guys who were involved in Nine Worlds were actually experienced convention runners. Even the ones that weren't had a lot of experienced guys behind them as advisors and helpers.
Yeah, it's pretty much just what you say. It's, you know, another thing that people don't talk quite as much about this with Dashcon, and this isn't really anything that's necessarily the con's fault. The venue was also sharing space with at least one wedding.
Oh, are you serious?
Oh, yes, I'm serious. There was a wedding going on at that convention. I have been to other conventions where there were events like that happening, but apparently some cosplayers did accidentally photobomb some wedding photos.
Whoops.
Which
Oh,
a lot of them were trying to avoid it, but there was literally no way that they could. Also, apparently some servers who may or may not have had anything to do with the wedding were wandering around and were offering alcohol to minors.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh.
They weren't even checking IDs, and they had to be told by the minors that they were underage. And people were going, wow, that's a good way for that hotel to lose its liquor license. Which is why I'm saying not everything was the Dashcon staff. Apparently the hotel had no idea what it was doing either.
Yeah, I've heard of that sort of thing happening before. Sometimes a hotel and a con are not a good fit.
Yeah.
To illustrate this, I mean, we can start talking more generally about events and cons from here, because I think we've kind of covered that we've hit the high points so far.
Or the low points, depending
That too.
on how you put it.
Yeah.
We've seen the ball pit and we went, huh?
Yeah.
Once you've seen the ball pit, there's nowhere else.
I'm not gonna get over that.
I have to tell you my favorite meme related to the ball pit, and then we'll move on. I'm sorry. There's someone who did a painting of the ball pit, like this commemorative painting, and they've got it up on eBay. With like the starting bid was like 99 cents or whatever, but they have a buy it now for 17,000.
Well
Googling
played,
this
that
now.
person. Well played.
Anyway, Skyblaze, continue.
Yeah. Where was I? Yeah, as I was saying, sometimes an event or a convention and a hotel just aren't a good fit. For example, I was a guest liaison at a con. Still am involved in the convention called Redemption, and we were at this hotel that we'd been there before and it had been fine, but the hotel had changed hands in between the convention events, and they had decided to inexplicably turn it into this like couples retreat for, you know, like romantic weekends and stuff, despite the fact that this hotel was in the middle of bloody nowhere just off a motorway. I didn't entirely understand. It's like, this is a really strange pace for a quote-unquote romantic getaway.
I'm going to tell you something right now, as a business major, a lot of business decisions made by people like that, made drunk.
Well, much is explained.
Yep. So we were quite happily running our convention, and there's a few guys who were there who are, you know, sharing convention space. We're just kind of ordinary guys. They're just minding their own business. But one night on the when we were having the convention kind of nightclub event, we had like a DJ in, and we were playing like a bunch of cheesy music and dancing to it. I happened to be near the door when a fairly drunk guy and his girlfriend, wife, whatever, decided to try and bulldoze their way into the convention exclusive nightclub event, which was, you know, supposed to be for the use of the convention only. It's a private event. You don't have a ticket, you can't come in. You'd think this would be fairly straightforward. This guy said, "Oh, I paid for this hotel," and threw the biggest tantrum and was getting quite aggressive and a bit violent. I and a friend of mine went to the hotel desk to report this and say, "Look, this guy's trying to force his way into our exclusive event, having not paid for a ticket." And their response was, that's too bad.
That sucks.
Yeah, that's a shame. Can't you get your security to sort this out? You know, we have paid you money, and these guys haven't paid us money, and they want to get into our event, and we don't want them to. They're like, nah. It's like, what? Why not? Well, he's a paying guest of the convention. He's a paying guest of the hotel, but he's not a paying guest of the convention. Not our problem.
That's just...
That, yeah,
Wow.
that, unfortunately, that's just someone being intentionally lazy. Like, I don't want to do this.
But
the
thing
get
was,
my money and leave.
The thing was, even when we reported this to senior management of the hotel the next day, they were like, "Oh well."
Well, yeah, because it was the next day. We can't do anything now.
Well, the attitude was, you know, these guys are our primary market, and you guys are just kind of like this contract that we inherited from the previous management. We're not interested. Oh,
wow!
Brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, that sucks tremendously. Like, I do know, like, the San Japan is the big convention down here that I will be volunteering at this weekend. Yay! They used to hold it in the big Marriott hotel that was downtown, and they had an all right, you know, sort of relationship. The couple times when I was volunteering, I didn't see any real problems. But I did notice there was a lot of business people very confused when they would walk in to get their rooms. I shared an elevator with a gentleman, and he just turned going, and just straight up goes, "What the fuck is going on?" I'm like, "It's a convention, sir."
See, okay. I have mentioned in the past having attended a furry con or two. There is no group of people on this planet that get the weirdest looks than that group of people.
Yep.
I recall standing, because whenever I go to a convention, I'm one of the more normally dressed people there. I mean, well, normal by my standards. I wear all black anyway, and at conventions I bust out my lengthiest goth coat. But beyond that, I've never really worn a costume or anything to any kind of convention, whether it be general geekery or a particularly obscure little niche like the people who are fond of the talking animals. Or the multicolored supernatural horse conventions. But some of my most surreal experiences have been with that, and the most amusing experiences have been just watching the people around me reacting. Like, I'm standing at a traffic light waiting to cross the street. A 6-foot-tall dragon in armor and with a sword walks up and stands behind me. I turn and look at him, he turns and looks at me, we silently nod and go back to looking at the light. And these guys behind me walk up, and they're in the middle of a conversation that just goes silent. And as the light changes, I hear one of them turn to the other and go, "What is going on?" And I just keep walking, because I'm like, you know what? I couldn't explain this if I tried. I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, stuff like that was one of the more amusing things about cons. I just going back briefly to the whole Dashcon thing. One of the things that I have discovered since I started, because I've been attending conventions since I was 16, which was in 1999. Yes, you can work my age out from that.
How do I math?
Let's ask Gonzo. Gonzo! Oh, he's not answering.
I think he has his "fuck off, I'm doing math" sign on his door.
There you go.
But yeah, the thing that I've learned since I switched from being just an attendee to being like a volunteer and then on committees is that when you're attending a convention, everything seems to be run a good convention. If you're attending a good convention, everything seems to run just fine. And you know, you go to the panel, maybe it's a couple of minutes late, that's fine. You know, everything seems to run smoothly from that perspective. If you're on a convention committee or one of the volunteers, then you see all the machinery. And, you know, all the things that people are having to very hurriedly duct tape together to make sure that everything carries running on time. You know, I compare it to, you know, the swan gracefully gliding across the surface of the pool, and underneath the feet are furiously paddling away. When you can tell a convention has gone
that's a very
wrong...
good comparison.
Thank you, Brendan. When you can tell that something has gone wrong is when the attendees can start seeing the machinery. And especially, it's gone especially wrong when they can start seeing the machinery breaking down.
That is completely accurate.
So, the fact that people could see the machinery breaking down from the very start of the con worries the fuck out of me.
Yeah, because cons are like, at least like like in backstage, I guess, area is sort of this weird controlled chaos where everyone's sort of running around, everything's doing whatever. Like you feel like if you breathe the wrong way, something bad will maybe happen, and so like everyone's sort of on edge. And I can understand that completely because it's usually a really big event. You want to make sure everything goes well and for it, things like that.
And everything,
so yeah,
everyone works themselves to death.
Oh, to tremendous death. Like I'm pretty sure if it was allowed, most of the people who work the cons would just fall asleep wherever they fell.
That's actually happened to me. I was being guest liaison among other things at Illustrious and EasterCon in 2011. Yeah, 2011. And I actually fell asleep in my chair in the main con room, the kind of control room, if you like. And I fell asleep in a chair, and one of the other committee kind of poked me awake, and I was like, and she kind of grabbed me by the arm, took me to her room, and says, "There is a soft, flat surface. Please avail yourself of its use for the next 2 hours. I'll be back to check on you then." Click went the door. "Hello, bed," said I. Sleep.
You know, I kind of wish I should volunteer for a con at some point because
you should.
I did volunteer for one last year. It was called Scare LA. It was Los Angeles' first Halloween themed convention. It was themed around haunted attractions and Halloween, and I was so looking forward to it. But I came down with like the death plague just less than a week before it started, and I was not ready for that yet. And oh, I felt terrible because I'd been looking forward to it for most of the year, and I had to cancel on them because I just, it was terrible.
Tell you what, John, why don't you come over here and volunteer for a couple of our cons? I'll make very good use of you.
I don't
That's
know.
such an endorsement.
See, I was like, a trip to the UK, and then I was like, oh, about this.
What could possibly go wrong?
Everything.
Oh, you never ask that question. Never.
How
ever,
hard can it be?
Ever.
You shut up.
Or that one.
But now, here's the question I have. This is just a random question, Skyblaze, but it's on the topic of conventions.
Okay.
How many different kinds of cons have you been to?
Oh, bloody
Because
hell.
there's so many different kinds.
Well, there's EasterCon, which is EasterCon and NovaCon, which is mostly lit conventions. I've been to a mostly Babylon 5 convention, a mostly Star Trek con, 2 mostly Star Trek cons. I've been to a Blake 7 convention. I've been to a couple of Doctor Who conventions. I've been to a couple of anime cons, a video gaming con. I've been to MCM Expo, which is all the things, although it's not really a con, it's an expo. Hellfire, what else have I done? Oh, I've been to a sword fighting convention because I went to Swash. What else have I done? I think that's all of them.
Got me seriously beat.
There's a bunch of like general media conventions, you know, covering a bunch of stuff that I've been to as well. But yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm not even in your galaxy, let alone your league. But it does.
Oh,
Transformers
conventions. I've been to those as well. And Sonic
Oh, there we go. She hasn't even remembered all
Transformers
of them
conventions and Sonic conventions. I had missed some out. There we go.
I was wondering when the Sonic cons were coming up, because I know you've been to Summer of Sonic.
I have been to a bunch of Summer of Sonics. There wasn't one this year, which made me sad. I can understand why, though, because the crew are so burnt out that they need a break, the poor sods. There's only about 10 of them.
I was just going to say that it warms my heart to remember that at one point Babylon 5 was popular enough to merit its own con.
You know, the Babylon 5 conventions were always, like, the biggest in the UK. They were... That's really cool. The 2 biggest Babylon 5 conventions in the world were both held in Blackpool in the I think it was in Blackpool in the UK. Was Babylon 5 the Alliance and Babylon 5... What was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was called. One was called the Alliance, and that was actually the con where JMS heard that Claudia Christensen wasn't returning for the 5th season. Yeah.
Oh.
Awkward.
Yep.
Yep.
But that thing was huge. They were in this really enormous con hotel, but we don't really have that many huge convention centres in the UK, so they tend to be in hotels, and this was like one of the bigger ones in the UK. But the fire department were actually on about shutting it down because it was that busy.
Good lord.
Yeah. And there were still people like, can we get tickets on the door? And they were like, fuck no. So yeah, that was pretty crazy. But yeah, that's the general list, I think.
I gotta go to more cons, and more varieties of cons. I got to make it to WonderCon shortly before I left California for all of like half of a day, so that was cool.
I tell you one that you really should try and get to is Gallifrey 1.
Yes!
Because
I have friends.
I've never been, but I have heard so many stories.
I have friends who have been there, and not only have they been there, but their baby, for whom they made a complete set of costumes of all 11 Doctors.
Oh yeah, you told me about this.
Yeah! Oh, that kid's going to grow up either really, really cool or really, really scarred. She did, however, stare down a Dalek, so, you know, she's not taking any guff from anyone.
Damn.
I know, nice. She doesn't get scared. She just kind of like put her hands on her hips and looked at it.
Like, what do you want, asshole?
The Dalek came up and it's like, I must exterminate the Doctor, and then it looked at her and it was like, this Doctor is too small. It was so cute.
That's almost as cool as when I was at the Doctor Who Kaylee that was here. Like a couple of, I think it was like a year or so ago. And me and my other half went, I was the 4th Doctor, he was the 5th. and there was some people who were actually doing a line dance as Daleks, and they were practicing in the corridors because we got there early to get a couple of drinks. And they like turned around and they all had plungers and were like, "It is the Doctor! We must exterminate him!" And I was like, "If I give you all jelly babies, will you let us through?" Yes! So I ended up giving all these Daleks jelly babies and putting them all in each plunger. It was brilliant.
That's
adorable.
I love cons for things like that.
Yeah, it was very silly.
Yeah, when a con seems to be working out, it's great. Is when they sort of don't work out, is when we have these other discussions like we had earlier.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what we were actually talking about.
Is there anything
Thank
else
you.
anybody wants to say about this?
Well, just in the way of closing thoughts, the great irony of Great Con administration is that when it goes really, really right, very few people seem to notice anything.
Yeah.
Because the con goes off exactly as it should. It's only when it goes horribly wrong that we get all this attention. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
In that way, it's kind of like IT support. You know, when it's working fine, nobody notices you. It's only when
It's
things
when-
are broken that people are like screaming for your blood.
Absolutely, and there's a reason why things like San Diego Comic-Con, WonderCon, and Emerald City Comic-Con, they have literally a small army to control everything to make it go well. It's a lot of work and effort to make things seem to run as smoothly as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, briefly, from just this corner of the internet, con people, administrators, gophers, we appreciate you.
Absolutely. A convention lives or dies on its volunteers. So, for all the convention volunteers and staff out there, we salute you.
We do indeed. As for my final thoughts about Dashcon, all I'm gonna say is, if you're considering pre-regging for the next one, maybe think carefully about that decision. Not saying don't do it, just, make an informed decision.
Oh, by the way, that painting you were talking about earlier, up to $52. 22 bids made.
Fantastic.
Right, well, I think that covers most of us. So all I've got to say is, from what I've heard, I mean, there's been an awful lot of disinformation put out and a lot of outright lies. But from what I've heard, this is a prime example of how not to run a convention. So lessons should be learned from this, not just from the con crew themselves at Dashcon, but from anybody who's going to attempt to run a convention in the future. If anybody actually does have any questions about, running a convention, ask me. I can put you in touch with some great people who can give you some great advice. I'll give you whatever advice I can. And there are plenty of resources out there on the internet about what to do when you want to run a convention, who to talk to, how to budget, all that sort of thing is available online. Please, if you're going to think about running a convention, avail yourself of its use.
And while we're on that topic, make sure that you've got all the permits that you're supposed to have, because that also appears to be something that Dashcon didn't do.
Also, pay your
Absolutely.
guests.
Yeah, seriously.
But above all, don't try to go by the seat of your pants. Plan ahead, or you just might end up losing your shirt. And the rest of it, too.
I think that's a fairly good remark to go out on, so all I will add in closing is be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. Taka, play us out.